name is Kennedy and you're a Republican and you're on MTV? Yeah. What?
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason. Thank you for coming. Today for lunch we're going to be interviewing MTV's Kennedy. She has not worked at MTV since the second Clinton administration, but as we were discussing at lunch, she will always be called MTV's Kennedy for the rest of her life. You've got a fan already, but Kennedy was one of the great faces of 90s alternative culture, not simply because she was a high-profile personality on MTV and a variety of other shows, and then later, before and later, radio shows, but she was alternative in a way that was not fully appreciated in the 90s, a great decade of alternatives, which is that she was a non-democratic, fawning liberal in the media, particularly among youth culture, which marked her as pretty much one of a kind, perhaps almost as much as her turban today marks her as one of a kind. It's not chemotherapy, right? Let's get that out.
Okay, I promised Nick a turban in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
We spoke before we came to this.
So that's one more thing off my bucket list. But
he'll be wearing it by the end of the interview.
Yeah, what we are, and what's interesting is that you'll never see it leave her head until it's on mine. It's quite a trick. But what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about Kennedy's adventures as a radio personality, as a TV personality, and also as one of the highest profile libertarians, particularly on the West Coast. And I want to make sure that I get your current gig correct, because I always forget the call letters of your radio station now.
KYSR. It's 98.7 FM. For those of you who live in Los Angeles. Music in the Morning. Woo.
With Kennedy. With Music in the Morning with MTV's Kennedy?
No.
Or no. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's good.
It's Clear Channel. It's not Viacom. So.
Okay. So it's a big fight. But well, let's talk about you know, at MTV you became known kind of as the House Republican. I mean, you were out there. You were having fun. You were indistinguishable from the other correspondents and other faces on MTV, except for this one glare. I mean, you were distinguishable in that you had a lot of energy and you were actually funny, but you were, you know, the same as everybody else, except you were a Republican. How did that come to public knowledge? And you know, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting because when I was at K-Rock, which is now my competitor in LA, which is where I got my start in broadcasting, I was an intern and then a DJ, which was great because I would do overnights. And on these overnight radio shows, I would write poems. And so I had a poetry corner, and a common theme in my poems was my love for Dan Quayle, of course. And so I had publicly proclaimed that. And I was also working as an intern on the morning show. And they were always delighted by my Republican leaning. So I never knew that it was a bad thing. I didn't realize there was an entire group of people out there.
Can you recite any of the Quayle sonnets from memory? Or
they're not suitable for this demographic, unfortunately. And now that I'm married, I don't feel that it's appropriate to make those proclamations in front of so many kind faces. But so Kevin Bean sent me to Little Saigon, where the Vice President was visiting, and I asked the last question during the press conference, which was, Mr. Vice President, how do I look in purple? And he paused for a second, and he said, you look great in purple. And it infuriated all of the political journalists in Southern California, and they were offended that their questions were not taken. And I saw that as a minor victory, and I realized that this was really a way to upset people.
Well, and then flash forward, you were covering the Clinton administration.
No, I was never allowed in the MTV studio when either Bill Clinton or Al Gore as candidates or as
But you were at the inauguration.
Yes.
You were a part of the coverage, and that's when your Republican leanings, deeply closeted, were thrust into public view by what process?
Well, it was interesting because the 1993 inauguration was the most star-studded party I had ever been to. It was it was as though Etta James at last was being played from every monument at full volume. People were so excited to have a Democrat in the White House, especially MTV. They were really emotionally and politically invested in this candidate because Bill Clinton's candidacy put MTV News and Tabitha Soren on the map because he was the first person who ran for president who was really ready to play ball and saw the power of MTV.
And because Al and Tipper Gore had such a tight relationship with popular music. And,
that was conveniently glossed over. That was never mentioned.
But it was a huge generational shift. That he was the first rock and roll president.
Yes, and so MTV embraced him and he embraced them right back. And there was something like 18 balls that night. And so an MTV threw this gala, and I'm not lying to you, it was literally like every, it was like Tom Brokaw talking to Robert De Niro, and there was Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick, and Bono's over here, and Jack Nicholson, and it was crazy. My head was just spinning, and I was so excited because John McLaughlin was there. And so, and he brought Martha Stewart as a date, and so he found Lloyd Grove, who at the time was a columnist for the Washington Post, and he was like, Lloyd, Martha Stewart is my date tonight. Lloyd, I brought her this evening, and Martha Stewart was looking, in 1993, she was looking good, okay? So that was a big catch. And
jail,
she was,
prison hardens a woman.
This was so pre-prison, so I was like, I'm a Republican, and I was wearing this beautiful Pamela Dennis red studded floor-length column gown. It was the nicest dress that I'd ever been in my life. It was worth thousands of dollars, and I had armed security to make sure I didn't soil it, and I red suede Chanel platform shoes, and so I lifted up my dress in the middle of the thing, and Matthew Broderick, and I remember his eyes, and I'm like, oh, Ferris Bueller, and his eyes got so big, and I showed him
you were no doubt showing him something he had never seen before.
My Republican tattoo, So I had gotten a Republican tattoo when I was 18 that Nick conveniently pointed out last night, looks like a pig.
That's what 2 children will do to a person, right?
Yeah, clearly. Okay, but see, that doesn't make any sense because the tattoo wouldn't shrink. You're such a misogynist.
Yes, no.
So anyhow.
But only towards women.
It's actually, Leandro will tell you a different story. Anyhow, Lloyd Grove ended up, he didn't write about Martha Stewart. He wrote about the woman in the red dress from MTV who lifted it up and embarrassed John McLaughlin. And then John McLaughlin told the story on The Tonight Show. And then I was invited on The Tonight Show and told the story. And then I was in Vanity Fair. And Lloyd Grove wrote an article about me in Vanity Fair. And
it was too much of a mind warp for MTV.
Wait a second, your name is Kennedy, and you're a Republican, and you're on MTV? What?
So, and then your later, so that became part of your persona, really, is that you were like a right-wing chick on MTV.
Yeah, and it's not something that I talked about too much on air, but there were times when if I was interviewing bands, and a couple of the bands that I remember, one was Marilyn Manson, and the other was Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine. And for those of you who know Rage Against the Machine's music, there's no column far enough left. I mean, they actually almost circle all the way around to being Callista Gingrich. Like, that's how liberal they are. It's impressive. And Tom Morello made a snide comment about me being a Republican, and I kind of got into it with him about, open markets, and he did not like that at all, because they actually, in some of their, one of their CDs, they have a list of books, like a photograph of book spines, and presumably like, okay, simpletons, this is what you should be reading. Here is your education, not only in music, but in life. Go. I always thought that was so condescending.
There wasn't a lot of Reagan biographies on the show. What now? You did one of your other big MTV political scores is that you rode on Bob Dole's campaign bus.
Oh, on the plane, on the bus. Yeah, I was on the.
It was 96 hours to victory.
That's exactly what it was.
And he slept, what, 92 of those hours?
No, he and Elizabeth Dole had the most incredible, vibrant spirits, and they were both very, very gracious. And I found Bob Dole to be very funny and charming, but he invited me on board like it was going to get him something, like, it was going to get him the youth vote. You know, the kids across America were going to tune into CNN and be like, wow, she's with Bob Dole. I'm changing my vote. I think the difference was marginal, but... Yeah. But I was with the Oak Ridge Boys and Chichi Rodriguez. Oh, really? So, you know, I don't want you to think that this was a square bus.
Chichi Rodriguez, right? He's Puerto Rico's own. What was the network's reaction when you became known as a Republican?
They were thrilled. Yeah. No, they actually were not. It was interesting because some of my counterparts were off hosting events for Planned Parenthood and various liberal organizations. And I remember I got a lot of grief for, I was given an honorarium to go speak at Phyllis Schlafly's Young Eagles Forum. And, you know, I flew to Washington, D.C., and it was great, but they were really upset about it. So they put a clause in my later contract at MTV that said I was not allowed to engage in any political speech or promotion without written consent from the network. And, you know, written consent from the network could take days. So if I called them the night before and said, Good Morning America wants me to come on tomorrow and give a young conservative rebuttal to the State of the Union address, and, you know, conveniently, there would be no one in the press department to get back to me with the written consent. So, and there was no one else at the network who had that. And I always thought that was really curious.
Right. Well, you know, one of the things that's interesting and that is particularly relevant to this audience is that over time, though, you also realized that you were not actually a Republican or a conservative.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you came to an understanding that you know, that you were actually libertarian and why you didn't realize it earlier.
Well, it's like thinking that you're a fetishist or a dominatrix, but I didn't like hurting people. I just like wearing leather corsets. And it was a really important distinction for me because I remember having a conversation with the editor, one of the editors from Spin Magazine, and he's like, you know, we talked about various views and what we agreed on, what we disagreed on, and he's like, you're not a social conservative. And that pained me because I really wanted to be on the bus, like I wanted to be a part of a group because I was always such a misfit. And, you know, he was absolutely right, and it was when Kurt Loder took me out for dinner. He took me to Chez Josephine in New York, and Kurt was always very, very gracious. And we were at two completely different worlds at MTV. You know, there was the news department, which, you know, they poured a lot of money into. It was taken very seriously. It was very well regarded within the network, and it established a name for itself outside of the network. And then there was the production side, woo! And, you know, we were the VJs, and we were in the back of Snoop's Hoopty, and, you know, we were just there to look pretty and keep the flow going. And I'll never forget when one of the MTV news producers got in a fight with one of the music producers at the studio because we weren't finished with our stuff, and the news producer's like, you're just leading to videos. And it's like, our leading to videos pays your salary. Like, we're the ones, when we're going down the 7-Eleven Slurpee slide at the beach house, that buys Tabitha the Soren's Jimmy Choo's.
So Kurt Loder, though.
Yeah, but Kurt was always so cool to me. He was always really, really kind. From the moment I got there, and I was so intimidated by him because he's very smart, he's very dry, he's so funny, but he's a tough nut to crack. And people were genuinely afraid of him because they knew if they said something dumb that he would call them out and just annihilate them. And so I just assumed that he was some lefty New York journalist, and he took me out and he gave me a copy of Ayn Rand's Objectivist Epistemology. And that was my first foray into libertarian ideology and thought. And I honestly didn't know what it meant to be a libertarian. I just knew it, reading about it, it made so much more sense. And then, you know, when you make a diagram of the really confining left-right spectrum, it's so much more complex than that. And it really is so inconsistent and narrow on both